Redditors who worked at Defunct stores, Blockbuster, Circuit City, etc. When did you realize they were done for? It's not Defunct at this time, but I worked for Pier 1 in the 90s and more recently as a holiday job. In the 90s we opened a fair number of credit cards, but in 2018 we were instructed to politely hound people about opening a credit card, which I hated doing. I don't know if they're done for, but it's rough out there in brick and mortar retail. There was much more sense of a solid business in 1998. Pier 1, a relic to when imports were considered exotic and somewhat luxury. Now, everything is an import and we associate the word with cheap developing world labor. We talked in our marketing classes about how Sears was the quintessential example of a company misreading the market trends. Sears should be what Amazon is today, but they didn't think that silly internet sales thing would pan out and stuck with their magazine catalog. Seems obvious now, but imagine their internal meetings. To be a fly on that wall. I worked at Circuit City as a manager for a few years throughout college. I realized they were done for when they stopped allowing us to hire additional help to cover the floor and fired commissioned employees. Circuit City might have survived if it tried to focus on customer service and in-store experience. When nobody is available to help and the customers truly wanted help to learn about products, there's a problem. When Circuit City did away with commission on sales, it completely killed customer service. Our employees had huge repeat customers who would come back every year to the same guys at Circuit City to make big purchases, $5,000 plus. The customers always bought from those employees because of great customer service. Worked at Sears Auto Center back when I was in college in 2008. I knew they were done for as soon as I started working there. Writing was on the walls, they were always losing money and stock was always limited. Articles we released year after year how they were top 10 companies to go out of business. I didn't care. It was a steady paycheck for a simple job while I was getting through college. We still have 2 Sears Auto shops left in Atlanta, and I went to one because it was the cheapest place that did Amazon tire installation. I counted 15 work bays in the store, and 2 cars there when I dropped off and picked up. Other than me, all the customers and techs were over age 65, and the signage all looked to be 30 years old. Definitely a weird, sad vibe to the place. When they started watering down the hand soap in the bathroom. Now anytime I go to any business and they have watered down soap, I worry for their employees. I worked at a Radio Shack in college. I knew they were done for before I even applied. I just needed some pocket money for weed and a WoW subscription. They were done in my eyes when I applied, got to the second round of interviews, and was told you could choose minimum wage, $4.25 HR at the time, or straight commission. Frick that. I was a new hire at a Kmart near where I used to live. When I was hired, Sears was already sinking. I knew that the store wouldn't be long if they couldn't separate from the parent company, but kept my hope up. After all, a burger chain had imploded a decade prior, but one store was an independent franchise and was, and still is, operating just fine. Fast forward a year and a half later and I noticed people complaining about the MoneyGram machines not working. Then I saw the face of the pharmacist there. She didn't say anything, but she knew almost a month before they made the announcement. They moved the store manager but told everyone else they could apply for the opportunity to work at another store. There were department managers who had been with the company for decades and they were told they could apply at an open store if they wanted to stay with the company. I took my reduced hours, got picked up at a Best Buy across town and walked away for the last time 2 weeks before they closed for good. I remember selling the money safe during that last week. It was surreal. Savannah. I didn't think it was over when Starbucks bought us, but it was when Starbucks raised their base minimum wage for all their employees, except Savannah employees. It was super publicized when this happened, but we were blatantly left out even though all our paperwork said we were employees of Starbucks. I was an assistant manager at the time and was told by corporate to lie to my employees and tell them that the raise was coming even though no raise was ever planned. That's when I knew and started an exit plan. On the bright side, I have a fuck ton of tea in my cabinet that I didn't pay for. End of night shrinking out. So, that's cool. I knew they were on their way out one night that I went in and ordered a particular tea that I could see they had in stock, but they refused to sell it because it's not in season. I guess they didn't want my money that badly. My hometown family video is finally closing after pivoting from movies to movies plus cell phones to movies plus CBD. I worked there for a month part-time 5 years ago. They didn't have a safe. At the end of the night you took the safe money and put it in a microwave on top of a mini fridge in the men's bathroom. I briefly worked at Kmart after my family moved to a new state. It was readily apparent that higher management was just trying to minimize their expenses until the stores were forced to close so they could have the largest post-bankruptcy payday they could muster. It was sad too because most of our customers would tell us how much they loved us over places like Walmart. If they had decided to invest in Kmart and actually gave a dang, it could have made a comeback and been a decent competitor. I worked at Blockbuster in the early 2000s. When Netflix came out, we told our district manager how they mailed DVDs directly to your door and asked what she thought. She said it was a joke and wouldn't last the test of time. She also couldn't let go of her White Snake groupie look from 1988. Tony Roma's. Not surprised they're all closing considering most have incredibly dated interiors from the 1980s and seem to only cater to the elderly. Their food is also really gross and way too expensive for the crap quality you get. I worked there one summer in 2009 and even back then I knew Tony Roma's would die the moment its clientele did. Swiss Chalet is another one that I see on its very last legs. Worked at Lehman Brothers during the crash. Tech. There were waves of layoffs. Those folks got a relatively great deal, severance, outplacement etc. Because it was Lehman Brothers we all thought it wouldn't crash. Dongfold couldn't cut a deal and we all burned. People came in afterwards to print out copies of their resumes. Consultants didn't know if we were going to get paid or not. Ever since then, I've cultivated networks to keep an ear to the ground. One hand on the exit door as it were. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns and AIG were all clients of the place I worked at when this went down. I worked at a place that did accounting software for these places and they were owned by a bank. Fun times watching it all go down. I was their graphic designer and a consultant. Thankful for having my portfolio ready at all times. I worked at KB Toys from 1998 to 2003. It was doomed the moment Bain Capital bought them. When it happened, no one knew who Bain was. But let me tell you, we learned quick that none of them had a clue as to how to run a business. They literally bought something they had no idea what to do with, wasted good money on stupid things and then slashed and burned the moment things got rough. Fun fact that no one knows about, upper management at Bain demanded employee discounts at our stores. So yes, Mitt Romney had a KB Toys employee discount card. Theirs were fancy and said Bain Capital KB Toys, but it had our numbering system on it and served the Dame function. Bain Capital paid $18 million plus debt for KB Toys. Then they cashed out $85 million. Subsequently they filed for bankruptcy. Worked for Gateway at one of their country stores selling PCS. Made full-time money working part-time, even had benefits. Started with a base pay plus commission and spiffs. For example, sell this item and make X amount of dollars extra. An individual could easily earn $80 to $100 in spiffs per computer sale. The PC market bottomed out in 2001 and Gateway made the huge mistake of acquiring e-machines. Management hyped up an exciting new commission system. Spiffs were gone, and we'd only receive our commission after reaching an absurdly high sales goal. It was played up to us that as long as we hit our goal we'd have massive commission checks. All it did was create competition within the sales staff. I'd come into work after a couple of days off to find the full-timers stole my sales to boost their own numbers. After a while sales goals were increased and commissions were even harder to get. Part-timers couldn't hit their sales goals no matter how hard they busted their asses. So I resorted to always pointing customers to the entry-level $799 desktop or $999 laptop. If I gave a quote to a customer, I'd tell them if they came back to buy and I wasn't in to not let the full-timers trick them into more expensive PCS. I moved from sales to merchandising because the store had to start carrying more products in store. No one wanted to wait 2 weeks for their PC to be ordered and shipped. Gateway went from a custom-built outfit building PCS in the US to pre-building PCS in Mexico and selling cheap plasma TVs. Quality control went down the drain. Customers would bring back PCS that wouldn't turn on for our service department. to open them up and find they didn't ship with RAM installed, or the processor. A few came from the factory shipped as empty cases, no motherboard or anything inside. Stores began closing left and right. My manager was sent to another store to help shut it down, and when he returned he called me into his office to let me know my position was being eliminated. Then he made the huge mistake of saying he was supposed to tell this to me 2 weeks earlier, but he didn't. I argued it wasn't fair, that I was supposed to basically have received a 2-week notice, and I demanded those 2 weeks back. Corporate surprisingly agreed with me, and I worked those last 2 weeks and barely did anything because no new merchandise was coming in. I was okay because I was already working another job full time. So all I needed those 2 weeks for was to get on benefits at the new job. They were only open another month or so after I left. Gateway rapidly declined after that, and Acer scooped them up super cheap. I always wondered what happened to Gateway. Thanks for that story. Ex-Blockbuster store manager here. For me, the beginning of the end was when services like Love Films started appearing. Did you know Blockbuster had its own DVD by post service? Probably not, because the only real advertising they did was getting the store employees to push it. A couple of years later we started getting ours cut. My store gradually went from 10:10 every day to 11:10 Friday, Saturday, and 12:9 the rest of the week. After that they started cutting staff down, so we were single cover most times. It was sad. Best job I ever had. I worked at a Wizards of the Coast retail store, and after they got bought out by Hasbro, they started selling off all the gamer stuff and brought in like hula hoops. It was pretty bad. Circuit City was done when management decided to focus on growing CarMax instead of its core consumer electronics business. Yes, CarMax was founded by Circuit City. My uncle was married to the Circuit City guy's niece. I knew they were done for when she stopped talking incessantly about her uncle's wealth. That must have made for some interesting dinner conversation. Circuit City made some interestingly boneheaded moves as it declined. Some of the articles made fascinating bedtime reading. Worked at Macy's for a year. Obviously they are still around, but not doing too well. You think it's a coincidence that you can never find an employee to check out? No, it's because they can't afford to keep many people on. That's exactly the reason I shop there. No one bugs me, great sales, and it's got that last person on the planet vibe. I worked at Borders bookstore for about a year in college. So many people would come in and spend hours reading books and magazines, at most paying for a cup of coffee. I worked in the cafe and it was literally always full, almost always with students studying and then just putting the books back, or leaving them for staff to put back. Around the same time Amazon was starting to be a big player in book sales, and I could often find a book that Borders was selling for $35 for like $10 online, cheaper even than my employee discount gave me. Borders basically became a preview for buying books on Amazon, or a library, neither of which are profitable ways to run a business. It was a fun place to hang out, but they hadn't monetized hanging out, and it was clear they weren't going to adapt to the changing book market. I left years before they went under, but even then I thought it was pretty obvious that as Amazon grew, they were done. I worked at Game Crazy, which was owned by Hollywood Video, and I worked in a joint store that had a GC inside, but divided off. A Hollywood Video. I knew the writing was on the wall after the first bankruptcy, and they did nothing to pivot afterwards. Their video rental business was a mess. The membership program was expensive and convoluted and not easy to explain. Corporate kept pumping more and more money into the video side while the game store was propping everything up and at better prices and trade-in values than GameStop. And we were treated better than GameStop. I knew the entire company was going to go under because they were refusing to double down on the game store and just compete with GameStop. Netflix was already gaining steam at that point. They could have pivoted into online game rental too, but they clearly didn't understand their own market. I knew I was right when the second bankruptcy happened. It was only a matter of time before they crapped down. Of course, now GameStop is in awful shape now, but they did it to themselves. They could still be more successful than they are now had they treated employees and customers better. They turned their company into a used car lot when their clientele is mostly introverts who want to be left alone and moms who don't want to be pitched to. They really went off the rails once their competition folded and eventually killed their own business. Circuit City made a decision to fire every hourly associate who made more than $14 an hour in 2007 to try to stop their bleeding of money, myself included, who made roughly $16. The blanket decision to fire most of their top earners based on a statistic spelled out the downfall for me. They would have needed to hire at least 4 or 5 high school kids to replace the revenue and value that I brought. They spiraled into disaster and then bankruptcy shortly after. Me and my dad worked for an extremely large construction company. Think top 3 in the nation for our line of work. It came out that the bigwigs had embezzled around $75 million and didn't lose jobs or were even prosecuted. Even after surviving the economic crap of 2008, we still had a ton of jobs and employees, but as soon as the big boss for our town jumped ship, most people followed. I knew as soon as the big guys knew it wouldn't last because they were cutting jobs instead of making things right. I worked at a bakery that was going under. I went to cash a paycheck for $80 and there wasn't any money in the account. Finally, a question I could answer. I worked at Blockbuster for a long butt time. 6 years, I think. I literally could not quit. I'd submit my 2 weeks notice and they'd keep putting me on the schedule, and like a schmuck I'd keep coming in. Anyways, we started doing the total access Netflix equivalent and had to get at least 2 sign-ups a shift for the 2-week free trial. It didn't matter who the F signed up, so cashier me would sign myself up. The manager was 100% on board with this, with a bazillion different email addresses. I had, like, 18 DVDs coming to my house every week addressed to my name 1, my name 2, etc. As a result, the division manager rewarded me for having the most sign-ups in her county. LMAO. I received a Blockbuster gift card. FFS. I love that place, but they buried themselves with all the dumb rules their total access thing had. It was so expensive and they limited the new releases too much. Worked at Blockbuster, but here's the kicker. It's still around. Bend, or home to the last Blockbuster on the planet. It was a really fun experience, and now it's honestly busier than ever after all the buzz. I'm gonna be in a feature-length documentary about it. Spent a summer working at Borders. One day an older gentleman walked in wanting to return a book against some store policy or another, and I had to tell him number. He started scolding me about how this is why Borders is going out of business. I had no idea. I was a teenager and just wanted cheap books as an added bonus to my paycheck. Lo and behold, a few years later. Former Sears LP here. I knew we were going under when we were bringing in a whole new management team. The old ways of wearing suits and having high-end customer service was being forced out by corporate and was replaced with low-level management of younger stores, American Eagle, Garage, etc. Within a short time all our management were wearing ripped jeans and corporate was putting cafes inside our stores. Corporate had no sense of direction and wanted to appeal to the younger audience. Meanwhile 80% of our client base was 50 plus. I worked at Circuit City. I knew they were done when Best Buy started selling CDs for $11.99, which was super cheap at the time. This got a lot of attention and made people like going there to shop instead of Circuit City. Worked at H.H. Gregg while I was in college for about a month. First day I sold over $4,000 worth of electronics and got $15 in commission because I didn't sell $4,000 of the right stuff. Direct quote from manager. They restructured the store 4 times while I was there to increase profitability. They wouldn't sell new stuff. They didn't sell consoles, games or even furniture. All in all, I've never, ever seen a more mismanaged company. I left because I could see the downfall before any of the idiot managers ever bothered to look and quit. The entire company went under a week later. I worked at Future Shop. I had no clue. We were completely blindsided. We went to work at 9 AM as usual and were told that the store is permanently closed and is becoming a Best Buy and we'd have to reapply if we wanted to work there. You're freaking right. Haven't stepped foot inside a Best Buy since. This is going to get buried, but I worked at Radio Shack in 0608. While this wasn't necessarily the time that it went under, everyone could feel the dynamic changing. The CEO at the time kept making ridiculous business decisions and kept trying to reinvent itself to compete with Best Buy. Instead of staying a hobby store, they tried focusing on cell phones and televisions. Their prices were always much higher than competing stores and they kept pushing accessories. Over the years they kept trying to rebrand their names and employees by changing uniforms, product, and even changing the name to the Shack. Had they consolidated and stayed a parts store, they may have survived. They tried too hard to be something they weren't. I was a store manager for Blockbuster right around the time that Netflix started cutting into their business hardcore. One day, I was told that my store would be closing, and I had to make a choice, either take an assistant manager position, a demotion, locally, or relocate to another store 2 states away. In the meantime, I would also have to pack up all of the store's inventory and ship it to other stores. Faced with the task of performing inventory of thousands of DVDs, video games, candy, popcorn, gift, etc., I quickly made my decision. I found another job, just threw random items in the boxes I was shipping to various stores for the week I was still there waiting to start with the other company, left my keys in the office on my last day, and never spoke to them again. My friend used to work at Circuit City in high school. Management literally never paid attention to anything. We stole hundreds upon hundreds of dollars worth of stuff from there without anyone ever noticing. When they did inventory, my friend said they had $400,000 worth of shrink. $400,000. When he said that they were one of the better stores when it came to shrink, I knew they were doomed. I think they went out of business about 3-4 years later. Your friend is the sole cause of Circuit City's demise. First they cut back on the trucks. Used to be the guys could stop to get gas wherever with no worries about reimbursement. Then they could only get so much at a time. Eventually, only select employees were the only ones with a fuel card and they gassed the trucks at select gas stations. The office couldn't use paper willy-nilly any longer. We no longer kept a stock of printer paper or ink and would instead purchase some once we were totally out. Daily shipments became bi-weekly, eventually down to a truck once a week. Along with this they cut inventory drastically. Eventually, they had nothing left to cut but people. Health insurance and Christmas end-of-year bonuses were already a thing long of the past and no pay raises in 3 years was here to stay. But after they cut the inventory was when they cut away all the full-time employees. It was basically like watching a train wreck in slow motion. I could see it coming from a long way off. The people in charge didn't know what they were doing and so spoke with the confidence of blind ignorance and they were quite convincing. In the end, it turns out they'd never had planned and it was indeed a train wreck. Movie Gallery Hollywood Video Manager. My area supervisor told me to do anything I needed to sign people up for our monthly subscription package. I started signing people up without their knowledge and waiving the fee. It kept his job from being liquidated for a couple months. I found out later. We were one of the last to close and one day we got an up shipment from other stores. Ended up selling thousands of DVDs for pennies on the dollar. My collection was huge. I worked at a mall in its dying days. The big sign for me was when they did a bunch of remodeling and put in a big new food court but only Burger King and Subway were the only options. At least 8 other spaces were left unused. I quit my job there in 2014 and the whole building is demolished now. Worked at Sears in 2007 for a holiday season. I didn't understand how they were in business. It was dead. I basically begged to work in the tool department as it was the only section that saw business. Being put at a cash wrap in clothing was a death sentence. I had several shifts in the men's department where I wouldn't serve a customer for a whole 8 hours. Even in the tool department, when it wasn't busy I mostly just directed people who parked in the lot since it was the empty and they wanted to know where a store was in the mall. I also processed a lot of Discover credit card payments as Sears processed those for some reason. Not sure if this counts since they are technically in business still, but I worked at Sears corporate 2 years before they declared bankruptcy. I knew within 1 week of me starting that the company was done for. Almost every floor in their head office was half full of employees. I had the pleasure of working in their technology department responsible for maintaining their online infrastructure and retail terminals. I can honestly say it was the worst job I ever had, and I've never worked with more incompetent employees. Everything was stuck in the years 2005. The office itself, The technology, the knowledge, the corporate culture. I sat in my cubicle working on a make-work project of almost no value despite my pleas to my boss and his superior. I listened all day as managers and supervisors sat on the phone discussing their disbelief in how Sears could be doing so poorly and why the public has such a poor perception of them. Amazon hasn't even made a profit so far and everyone has faith in them. My entire department was staffed with tech industry rejects and cheap labor. About 85% minus 90% of the floor was Indian nationals on an H-1B visa with a degree from some unknown back alley university. Everybody stateside could smell the end was near and they struggled to hire real talent. Walking into work every day felt like I was rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I worked for Blockbusters for years back in late zeros. We were a large store with a huge selection of stock. As an employer you got free rentals. I knew we were done for when my manager started using the company postal account to mail his Netflix DVDs back. I worked at Bont and I realized it was done when I work an 5-hour shift and I made no sales and something was returned. I was often paid much more than my sales figure. I wasn't paid a lot. I used to work for a small independent bookstore in my hometown. This was about 20 years ago, just as Amazon was becoming a thing. I would work weekends by myself open to close. I knew the writing was on the wall when I would work an entire Saturday or Sunday without a single customer coming in. They closed up shop a few years after I started working there. Unfortunately, it was a really nice place. Bookstores are awesome. Not a franchise, but a small furniture store. The owner wasn't able to pay the vendors and started making knockoff furniture. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.